A Brief History of Japan. Hello everyone, and welcome to our journey through Japanese history. Today we're going to explore how Japan became the fascinating country we know today. From ancient times to the modern world, Japan has a story that will surprise you. So sit back, relax, and let's discover Japan together. The very beginning. Japan's story starts thousands of years ago. The first people arrived in Japan around 30,000 years ago. They crossed from Asia when the sea level was much lower than today. These early people were hunters and gatherers. They lived in caves and simple shelters. Around 14,000 years ago, something special happened. The Japanese people created some of the world's first pottery. This period is called the Jomon period. The word Jomon means rope pattern because people decorated their pots with rope marks. These early Japanese people were very creative. They made beautiful clay figures and lived in small villages near the sea and rivers. The Jomon people ate fish, deer, wild plants, and nuts. They knew how to use fire and make tools from stone. Life was simple but peaceful. This period lasted for over 10,000 years. That's longer than all of recorded history since then. Rice changes everything. Around 300 BC, big changes came to Japan. New people arrived from Korea and China. They brought something that would change Japan forever: rice farming. This period is called the Yayoi period. Rice farming was much better than hunting and gathering. People could grow more food in smaller areas. This meant villages could become bigger. People had more time to do other things besides looking for food. They started making bronze and iron tools. They began to create social classes, with some people becoming leaders. The Yayoi people were also warriors. They fought over the best land for growing rice. This was the beginning of Japan's warrior culture. These early battles would shape Japanese society for thousands of years to come. The first emperors. By 300 AD, Japan was changing again. Small kingdoms were forming across the islands. The most powerful kingdom was called Yamato. The Yamato rulers said they were descendants of the sun goddess Amaterasu. This was the beginning of Japan's imperial family. The Yamato period brought new ideas from China and Korea. Buddhism arrived in Japan around 550 AD. This religion would become very important in Japanese culture. The Japanese also learned Chinese writing, art, and government systems. During this time, Japan built its first permanent capital city called Nara in 710 AD. Nara was modeled after the Chinese capital. Beautiful temples were built there. The most famous is Todaiji Temple, which houses a giant bronze Buddha statue. This statue is still there today and weighs over 250 tons. The Golden Age of Culture. In 794 AD, the capital moved to a new city called Heian, which we now call Kyoto. The Heian period lasted until 1185 AD. This was Japan's golden age of culture and art. During the Heian period, Japanese culture really began to develop its own unique style. The Japanese created their own writing system called hiragana and katakana. Before this, they only used Chinese characters. This period gave us some of the world's greatest literature. Lady Murasaki wrote The Tale of Genji around 1000 AD. Many people think this is the world's first novel. It tells the story of a prince and his romantic adventures. The book shows us how elegant and refined court life was during this time. The Heian period was also famous for its beautiful art, poetry, and fashion. Noble ladies wore many layers of colorful silk robes. They painted their faces white and blackened their teeth, which was considered beautiful then. Men and women wrote poetry to each other as a form of communication. However, while the court enjoyed this elegant lifestyle, real power was slowly moving away from the emperor. Local military families were becoming stronger. The peaceful Heian period was about to end. The Age of Warriors. By the late 1100s, two powerful warrior families were fighting for control of Japan, the Taira and the Minamoto. In 1185, the Minamoto family won. Their leader, Minamoto Yoritomo, became Japan's first shogun. A shogun was a military ruler. The emperor still existed, but he had no real power. The shogun controlled the army and made all the important decisions. This system would last for almost 700 years. The warrior class was called samurai. These were professional soldiers who followed a strict code of honor called Bushido, which means the way of the warrior. Samurai were supposed to be loyal, brave, and willing to die for their lord. They carried two swords and trained constantly in martial arts. The samurai period brought us many things we still think of as typically Japanese. These include the tea ceremony, flower arranging, and martial arts like kendo and judo. Zen Buddhism also became very popular during this time. Japan closes its doors. In 1600, a new shogun family called the Tokugawa came to power. They moved the capital to Edo, which is now Tokyo. The Tokugawa shoguns ruled Japan for over 250 years. The most important decision the Tokugawa made was to close Japan to the outside world. In 1633, they banned almost all foreigners from entering Japan. Japanese people were not allowed to leave the country either. This policy was called Sakoku, meaning closed country. Why did they do this? The Tokugawa were worried about European influence, especially Christianity. Portuguese and Spanish missionaries had converted many Japanese people to Christianity. The shoguns feared this would threaten traditional Japanese culture and their own power. During this closed period, Japan developed a unique culture. The merchant class became wealthy and powerful. They created new forms of entertainment like kabuki theater and sumo wrestling. Woodblock printing became popular, giving us beautiful art that we still admire today. However, closing the country also meant Japan missed out on many scientific and technological advances happening in Europe and America. By the 1850s, Japan was far behind the Western world in military technology. The West arrives. In 1853, everything changed. American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Japan with 4 warships. These ships were powered by steam, which the Japanese had never seen before. The ships were painted black, and the Japanese called them black ships. Perry demanded that Japan open its ports to American trade. The Japanese realized they had no choice. Their old weapons were no match for modern Western technology. In 1854, Japan signed its first treaty with America. Soon, other Western countries demanded similar treaties. Many Japanese people were angry about these forced treaties. They felt humiliated that foreigners were dictating terms to Japan. This anger led to a revolution in 1868. The samurai overthrew the Tokugawa shogun and gave power back to the emperor. This event is called the Meiji Restoration. Japan catches up fast. The new emperor was called Meiji, which means enlightened rule. The Meiji period lasted from 1868 to 1912. During this time, Japan changed faster than almost any country in history. The Japanese leaders realized that to survive in the modern world, Japan had to become like the Western countries. They sent students to Europe and America to learn about science, technology, and government. They invited foreign experts to come to Japan and teach. Japan built its first railroad in 1872. They created a modern army and navy. They built factories and started making their own steel and textiles. They also created a new education system. By 1900, almost all Japanese children could read and write. The Japanese government also made big social changes. They ended the samurai class and said all people were equal under the law. They allowed people to choose their own jobs and travel freely within Japan. Women got more rights, though they were still not equal to men. Japan becomes a world power. By the early 1900s, Japan had become strong enough to challenge other world powers. In 1904 to 1905, Japan fought a war against Russia and won. This shocked the world. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian country had defeated a European power. Japan's victories made the country confident, perhaps too confident. Japanese leaders began to think Japan should control all of East Asia. This led to conflicts with China and eventually to World War II. The Dark Years. From 1931 to 1945, Japan was almost constantly at war. First, Japan invaded Manchuria in northern China. Then in 1937, Japan began a full-scale war with China. In 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and entered World War II. These were dark years for Japan and its neighbors. The Japanese military government controlled everything. People who disagreed with the government were imprisoned. The Japanese army committed terrible crimes in the countries they occupied. The war ended suddenly in August 1945. America dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were the first and only nuclear weapons ever used in war. The destruction was enormous. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. Starting over. After the war, American forces occupied Japan. General Douglas MacArthur led the occupation. The Americans wanted to make sure Japan would never again threaten world peace. The most important change was Japan's new constitution, written in 1947. This constitution made Japan a democracy. It gave equal rights to all people, including women. Most importantly, Article 9 of the Constitution said Japan would never again have an army or fight wars. The Americans also broke up the big Japanese companies and gave land to farmers. They encouraged labor unions and free speech. Japan became a completely different country from what it had been during the war. The economic miracle. In the 1950s, something amazing happened. Japan's economy began to grow incredibly fast. People called it the Japanese economic miracle. How did this happen? Japan had several advantages. The country had a well-educated population and a strong work ethic. Japanese companies focused on making high-quality products. They also learned the latest technology from Western countries and improved upon it. Japanese companies like Toyota, Sony, and Honda became world famous. Japan became the leader in making cars, electronics, and other manufactured goods. By the 1980s, Japan had the world's second-largest economy, after only the United States. The Japanese people's lives improved dramatically during this time. In the 1950s, most Japanese families were poor. By the 1970s, most had cars, televisions, and washing machines. Japanese cities were rebuilt with modern buildings and infrastructure. Challenges and changes. The 1990s brought new challenges. Japan's economy slowed down significantly after decades of rapid growth. This period is sometimes called the lost decade because economic growth was very slow. Japan also faced social changes. The population began to age rapidly. Young people had fewer children. This meant fewer workers to support more elderly people. Immigration was very limited, so there weren't enough new workers coming from other countries. Despite these challenges, Japan remained an important country. Japanese culture spread around the world through anime, manga, video games, and pop music. People everywhere began to appreciate Japanese food, art, and philosophy. Japan today. Today, Japan is a peaceful, democratic country with a rich culture and advanced technology. The Japan of today is very different from the Japan of 150 years ago, yet it has managed to preserve many of its traditional values and customs. Modern Japan faces several challenges. The population is aging and shrinking. The economy grows slowly compared to other Asian countries. Natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis continue to threaten the islands. However, Japan continues to innovate and adapt. Japanese companies are leaders in robotics, renewable energy, and space technology. Japanese culture continues to influence the world through movies, fashion, and food. Lessons from Japanese history. What can we learn from Japan's long history? Perhaps the most important lesson is that countries can change dramatically while still keeping their essential character. Japan has been through periods of isolation and openness, war and peace, poverty and wealth. Through all these changes, the Japanese people have maintained their unique culture and values. Japan's history also shows us the importance of education and hard work. Whether it was learning Chinese writing in ancient times or Western technology in the modern era, Japan has always been willing to learn from others and improve. Finally, Japan's story reminds us that no country is perfect. Japan has made mistakes, sometimes terrible ones. But the country has also shown that it's possible to learn from those mistakes and build a better future. Conclusion. From the first pottery makers of the Jomon period to the high-tech society of today, Japan has had a remarkable journey. It's a story of warriors and poets, emperors and merchants, tradition and innovation. Understanding Japanese history helps us understand not just Japan, but how societies change and adapt over time. Japan's experience shows us that preserving tradition and embracing change don't have to be opposites. They can work together to create something unique and valuable. The next time you see a Japanese product, watch a Japanese movie, or eat Japanese food, remember this long and fascinating history. Every aspect of modern Japan has roots that go back hundreds or even thousands of years. That's what makes Japan such an interesting and important country in our world today. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Japanese history. I hope it has given you a new appreciation for this remarkable country and its people.